Ryo wakes up surrounded by clouds and finds himself in front of an angel. The angel explains to him that he has recently died but will not yet depart to the afterlife. In short, Ryo has become the latest victim of the infamous truck. Now it is Michael's task to send him to a new world so he can start a new life. According to Michael, Ryo will not be given any special mission or grand goal in this new world. He can live as he pleases. When Ryo expresses his desire for a peaceful and relaxed life, Michael has no objections. But before sending him on his way, Michael gives Ryo a brief overview of the world he will be reincarnated into. The world is called Phi, a magical land where about 20% of the population can cast spells tied to their natural elemental affinity. In Ryo's case, his strongest affinity is the water element. Since Ryo wished for a peaceful and relaxed life, Michael has prepared a cozy little house for him. As a starter package, he receives 2 textbooks, a knife, and even a protective barrier around the house that keeps monsters at bay. As part of his beginner's package, Michael has provided Ryo with a storage house filled with food supplies for 2 months, so he won't go hungry anytime soon. Additionally, Michael has included a manual with detailed information about every monster Ryo might encounter in the region. While this will be useful later for dealing with the creatures of the forest, Ryo's current priority is to test his newfound magical abilities. He steps outside and casts the spell, "Water, water, come forth," whereupon a water orb immediately forms in his hand. Magic turns out to be much easier than he thought. Even more surprising is that he can cast the same spell by simply imagining the water orb. Saying the incantation aloud is not really necessary. Now that he has confirmed he can wield magic, he heads straight to the bathhouse and begins filling the tub with water. But he quickly notices a problem. He only knows how to create water, and he certainly won't enjoy a bath that isn't warm. So he goes outside and tries to start a fire to heat the water manually. The only problem is that he has no idea how to start a fire this way. After a while, he gives up and lies defeated on his back. But as he gazes at the sun, an idea strikes him. Ryo grabs a bowl, fills it with water, and begins to focus on it. He tries to compress the water while simultaneously drawing out its heat. Slowly, ice begins to form. With a bit more effort and practice, he manages to shape the ice into an improvised magnifying glass. With it, he uses sunlight to start a fire. With the fire finally burning, he heats his bath, which was previously filled with cold water. By the end of his first day, he can finally relax and enjoy a proper bath. Now that he has mastered ice making, Ryo realizes that the opposite should also be possible. If he can extract heat to freeze water, he should also be able to add heat to create warm water. This will be his next goal, something he plans to practice in the coming days. The next morning, while Ryo eats breakfast, he begins to think. With only 2 months' worth of food supplies from Michael, he knows he'll soon have to hunt to replenish his stock. But he doubts a simple knife will be enough to fend off the forest monsters, so he decides to start practicing his attack magic. His first attempt involves hurling a water orb at a tree, and it works exactly as he imagined. But a small splash of water won't do much in a real fight. He recalls a method to increase the power of water, so he gathers another orb, this time compressing the water into a focused point to create more pressure. The idea is good, but his control isn't strong enough yet. His water jet has barely more force than a toy water gun. Ryo remembers something Michael mentioned before his reincarnation. Magic heavily depends on imagination. The clearer the image in his mind, the better the result, and he needs to refine it through practice. After several days of relentless training, Ryo's water jets begin to take shape and look decent. But they are still far from strong enough to defeat a monster. Ryo has also figured out how to create warm water, so he can enjoy warm baths anytime. However, he's still working on fine-tuning the temperature, as his control isn't quite perfect yet. The next morning, he decides to practice his ice magic again. This time, he tries to summon ice directly from the air, which is difficult and takes nearly 3 minutes. Finally, he succeeds in creating ice from nothing. Unlike water, however, he finds it hard to hurl ice with the same ease. Combat training hasn't been going particularly well so far. None of the spells Ryo has come up with have shown much effectiveness. Still, he spends the next few hours pushing himself, practicing relentlessly until he finally collapses from mana exhaustion. Having reached his limit for the day, he ends the training. But the next morning, as soon as his mana is fully restored, he dives back into training. This routine becomes Ryo's daily life over the next few weeks. Thanks to his hard work, he can now create ice instantly, making it a reliable attack spell. With his new set of attack spells finally ready and his food supplies running low, Ryo ventures into the forest for the first time to hunt. He quickly notices a trail of animal tracks and decides to follow them, which leads him to a nearby river. While exploring the area, he comes across quartz at the riverbank, which he can use to start a fire by striking it against his knife's blade. He also takes the opportunity to gather some detoxifying herbs in case he needs them later. But suddenly, a deep growl sounds behind him. As he turns around, he faces a lesser boar and freezes in fear. The boar charges at Ryo, but this is his first life or death fight, so he panics. At the last second, he snaps out of it and leaps to the side, narrowly avoiding the beast's charge. But the boar isn't done yet. It turns around, ready for another attack. Fortunately, Ryo's mind clears just in time. As the boar charges at him, he quickly creates an icy path beneath its hooves, causing it to slip. Without wasting a moment, he summons several sharp ice spikes directly in the boar's path, piercing and killing it instantly. After butchering the boar, Ryo pulls out the monster manual to learn more about it. According to the book, the lesser boar is indeed the weakest monster found in this forest. The manual is clearly intended for beginners, as most of the creatures listed are fairly simple. But toward the end of the book, Ryo notices 2 additional pages that stand out. They seem to contain something important. One of the pages describes dragons, incredibly powerful creatures capable of wiping out entire cities single-handedly. The manual urgently advises fleeing immediately if one ever encounters a dragon, as fighting one would be hopeless. However, escaping a dragon is also unlikely, so encountering one means certain death. Another page mentions mysterious beings called Akuma, apparently a type of fallen angel. The book provides very little information about them. However, the only advice the book offers is simple: if you ever encounter one, you're as good as dead. The next day, Ryo sets out to hunt again. But while he's distracted, a giant assassin hawk swoops down from above and launches a surprise attack. The creature uses wind magic to pierce its prey with razor-sharp cuts. Ryo has no choice but to run and quickly summon ice shields to deflect the incoming wind blades. He knows hawks are extremely dangerous opponents and would prefer to avoid a fight. But escape isn't an option. That means he has no choice but to stand his ground and fight back. He raises his hand and fires a stream of water jets. But the hawk deftly dodges the attack and dives toward him. Using wind magic to strike, Ryo reacts just in time, forming an ice shield that cuts the hawk across the eye, causing it to crash to the ground. Shortly after, the hawk regains consciousness. Although it has permanently lost an eye, it takes to the skies to retreat. But before it disappears, it fixes Ryo with a final glare, memorizing his face, because now it's personal. Ryo breathes a sigh of relief, grateful to have survived. Still, this is far from the peaceful life he had imagined. During the hunt with the hawk, he ran so deep into the forest that he completely lost his bearings and wanders until late into the night. While searching for the way home, he unexpectedly stumbles upon a glowing lake, in the middle of which stands a Dullahan. And judging by its appearance, the creature has already noticed him. Over time, Ryo refines his skills through relentless training, mastering the art of hunting and preserving food with little effort. His water magic has become significantly more powerful. He can now summon razor-sharp ice plates and bring them down in an instant. Even his water jets have reached new heights, cutting through solid stone with ease. At this point, his combat prowess has become impressive. But ice magic isn't the only thing Ryo has practiced. Since his encounter with the Dullahan, he ventures into the forest every night to fight it. Strangely, the Dullahan is never mentioned in the monster manual. Either they aren't classified as monsters, or they're too advanced for a beginner's guide. Still, Ryo remains determined to face it. He charges in with his ice staff and begins swinging, treating the encounter more like a training session than a real fight. After all, the Dullahan far surpasses him in both strength and technique. Ryo does his best to defend himself, summoning ice shields to block incoming strikes. But despite his efforts, he's quickly overwhelmed and knocked down within seconds. Although the Dullahan has never spoken a single word to him, Ryo can't shake the feeling that it has taken on the role of a mentor, trying to shape him into something stronger. Suddenly, the Dullahan raises its sword and channels water magic to extend the blade. Ryo is stunned to discover that it can use water magic too. After showing him how the technique works, the Dullahan hands the sword to Ryo and calmly steps out onto the lake. One day, while Ryo is hunting, he is ambushed by the same assassin hawk from their earlier encounter. He doesn't recall it being black before. It must have evolved, driven to become stronger just for this moment of revenge. The hawk dives toward Ryo, unleashing a barrage of wind cuts. In response, Ryo quickly summons 5 layers of ice walls for protection. But now that the hawk has evolved, its wind attacks are far more powerful, strong enough to shatter all of Ryo's defenses in an instant. And now, a wave of fear washes over him. Ryo sprints across the field, throwing up ice walls to shield himself from incoming strikes. When he spots an opening, he fires back with a barrage of ice spikes. But the hawk effortlessly dodges them and charges forward with a sudden burst of speed. And that's not the only surprise it has in store. The hawk lets out a piercing screech at a frequency that disrupts Ryo's magic, causing his ice shields to vanish and leaving him nearly defenseless. But the hawk isn't done yet. It hovers menacingly before him, and Ryo senses a major attack is coming. Though he can't predict when moments later, Ryo feels electricity in the air as a lightning bolt shoots directly toward him. And such an attack would have been fatal, but fortunately, he was able to use a stick as a lightning rod and leap away to save himself. As Ryo tries to shake off the remaining shock, the hawk dives down to deliver a fatal strike with its sharp talons. At the last moment, Ryo summons his ice blade and blocks the attack. They exchange several more blows, but Ryo recalls his intense training with the Dullahan, so he spots an opening in the hawk's guard and drives his sword straight through its neck. As the hawk collapses to the ground, Ryo slowly approaches it, feeling a sense of understanding. He knows how it feels. The hawk lost an eye because of him, and since then, it was driven by the urge to prove it was stronger, pushing itself to evolve. But Ryo has worked hard to become stronger too. And in the end, the hawk was defeated despite everything afterward. Ryo heads home. But to his complete surprise, a dragon suddenly appears before him. Recalling what the book said about dragons, that they are invincible, he's convinced this is his end. But to his surprise, the dragon speaks to him through telepathy. It doesn't seem aggressive at all. In fact, it explains that it's just passing through, and is looking for a black hawk that has been roaming the area. The dragon only wants to know if Ryo has seen it nearby. Relieved that the dragon isn't hostile, Ryo quickly realizes it must be referring to the hawk he just defeated. Nervously, he apologizes and explains that the hawk attacked him first, leaving him no choice but to fight back and end its life. The dragon is shocked that a human like Ryo could defeat a hawk, but doesn't seem particularly bothered by it. What really catches its attention is the sword Ryo is carrying. It immediately recognizes it as the blade of the Fairy King. For the Fairy King to entrust such a weapon to a mere boy must mean Ryo did something to earn its favor. The dragon turns to Ryo, and Ryo, still knowing little about this world, hopes to ask it some questions. The two end up chatting for several hours into the evening, but their conversation is eventually interrupted when the dragon says it must return home. Ryo expresses his gratitude for the dragon's answers, and the dragon thanks him in return, saying it's been a long time since it had such a stimulating conversation. They part warmly. But meanwhile, up in the sky, Michael is going through the documents related to Ryo's reincarnation when he suddenly notices something he overlooked before. It turns out that Ryo was granted a hidden trait, something Michael hasn't seen since he sent a girl to this world 10,000 years ago. In Ryo's case, the trait is eternal youth, and Michael finds that quite unusual. Craving some good grilled seafood with salt, Ryo heads toward the shore. A massive shipwreck catches him off guard when he gets there. Finding a dead man's body fills him with sadness. But then he hears another guy groaning, which brings him relief and joy. Someone actually survived. Abel remembers how their ship got destroyed by some giant sea monster. When he wakes up, he's amazed he's still alive. Looking around, he spots his stuff placed next to the bed, so he grabs his sword and walks out. Ryo shows up and greets him. Abel's shocked that he didn't sense Ryo at all. Looking at Ryo's clothes, he first thinks Ryo doesn't have anything else to wear, but then realizes he shouldn't judge the guy who saved his life. He introduces himself and thanks Ryo for the rescue, but Ryo says he just brought him home, so no thanks needed. He shares the bad news that sadly, no one else made it. Abel figures their bodies probably washed up on shore too. He tells Ryo they were all smugglers, so Ryo doesn't need to worry about them. This news shocks Ryo. Abel's stomach starts growling before he can say more. Ryo invites him to lunch. During their meal, Abel finds out Ryo doesn't own any clothes, which surprises him. He asks why Ryo doesn't buy new clothes, but then realizes the obvious: no money means no necessities. He worries about offending Ryo, but Ryo explains it makes sense since there aren't any towns nearby to buy clothes from. Ryo must have gotten their food by hunting, which impresses Abel. Did Ryo use that knife for hunting? Nope, just for protection and cleaning whatever he catches, Ryo explains, since he uses water magic for hunting. Pretty impressive, Abel thinks, since even in the central areas, only about half the people can use magic, and he's not one of them. Rio remembers Michael saying magic users make up 20% of people, but Abel can't understand his mumbling. Rio just says it's nothing. Abel asks Rio to take him to the coast. He needs to check something. They talk about staffs while walking. Since Rio's a magician, he must need one, right? Rio says he doesn't have one, which shocks Abel and makes him think Rio's too poor to buy one. Abel insists that if they run into trouble, Rio should let him handle it. Rio refuses, but Abel keeps pushing. His reputation would be ruined if he's always the one getting saved. Abel's worry about being the guy who always needs rescuing makes sense, especially since those characters usually don't last long in most stories. When they get to the shore, they're shocked to find the bodies are gone. Rio thinks either monsters ate them or the ocean carried them back out. Abel realizes that without Rio saving him, he would have ended up the same way, so he's grateful to be alive. Rio says Abel must be really lucky, and Abel agrees. Abel mentions it feels weird for the guy who saved his life to call him Mr., even though Rio thinks Abel is older. Since Abel asked, Rio agrees to use his first name. This makes Abel happy since that's how all his friends talk to him. Rio's surprised that Abel thinks of him as a friend. While Rio's thinking about this, Abel tells him he couldn't find what he was looking for. Rio asks what Abel plans to do next. Abel says he needs to find his friends somehow, and the first step is getting to the town of Lon. Rio hasn't been there himself, but he thinks it's north and they'll need to cross that part of the island. Abel gets an idea and decides to ask Rio to be his guide. Rio agrees, but only if he gets at least one day to get ready. Rio realizes he won't be able to keep living his quiet life anymore. That night, when Rio tells Abel he needs to say goodbye to someone, Abel's surprised since it's really late. But Rio says this person is only around at this time. As Rio leaves, Abel remembers how he said earlier that no one else lived nearby, but thinks maybe Rio wants to pay respect to someone, and maybe he wasn't always alone on the island. Still, it's not Abel's business to get involved in Rio's personal stuff. Later, we see that Rio actually went to say goodbye to the Delahan, telling it he'll be leaving the Rondo Forest for a while. He feels thankful for all the training he got that helped him survive. Since he'll be gone for a while, he decides to use all his power in their last sparring match. Rio charges forward with everything he's got, but the Dohan easily blocks all his attacks, leaving him exhausted. Before leaving, the Dohan gives him new clothes, which makes Rio really happy, and he promises to wear them proudly. The following day, they finally begin their journey, with Rio wearing his new outfit that fits perfectly. On their way, they soon encounter a lesser boar. Abel tells Rio to stand behind him and observe. He charges at the boar and activates the combat skill called Total Impalement, creating a hole in the boar's abdomen, killing it instantly and impressing Rio. Rio wonders what kind of skill that is. Abel thinks a magician like Rio must be seeing it for the first time, but it's very common among swordsmen and other weapon users. The next morning, as they continue their journey, Abel hears a sound and they notice two lizards in the marsh. Abel thinks they'll be difficult to handle in water, so they decide to take an alternative route to avoid them. As they move along the alternate path, Rio senses that the lizard folk are pursuing them. He informs Abel, who realizes they have no choice but to fight. Rio tells him there are many of them, so he'll use his magic to eliminate them. Abel reminds him he lacks his staff, but Rio simply chants a spell and kills them all with icicles, shocking Abel. Together, they defeat all the lizard folk. After the battle, Abel asks Rio about the spell, noting that the wind magicians he knows can only cast one spell per invocation. Rio suggests that perhaps it's different for water magic. Before resuming their journey, Rio uses magic to summon water for hydration. However, Abel notices that Rio used a different incantation than before, making Rio nervous, and he quickly changes the subject, saying Abel must be imagining things. After walking briefly, Abel gives Rio a coin, surprising him since it's his first time seeing this world's currency. Abel explains it's a bronze florin used in the kingdom of Knightly where Lon is located. He further explains that in the central provinces, each region mints their own coins but all use the same denominations, and Knightly is one of 3 major nations alongside the Duhai Empire and the Handalu Federation. Rio finds the name Duhai somewhat strange, making Abel wonder if he has issues with that nation. Rio clarifies he just finds the name unusual. He explains that a nation's name is very important to its people since they must introduce themselves everywhere as being from Duhai, which does sound odd. Rio admits he wouldn't like introducing himself that way, and Abel thinks he's overthinking it. Eventually, they exit the forest. While walking, Abel notices a rock moving and prepares to attack, but Rio creates an ice wall that blocks the rock. Abel notes they've been surrounded as they've stumbled into a rock golem's nest. But Rio is surprised to see the rock golems since he always thought they were humanoid with arms and legs. Abel tells Rio to stay put while he charges toward the golems, but his total impalement attack has no effect as it quickly regenerates itself, shocking him. Rio tells him he has an attack he wants to try, so Abel tells him to proceed. Rio creates 10 layers of ice walls joined together and drops them over the golem to immobilize it. Abel is shocked to see such powerful magic. But Rio casually mentions he's only taken out 2 golems so far and plans to do the same with the rest. Soon they eliminate most of the golems with only 1 remaining. But surprisingly, it isn't moving. Rio thinks perhaps they draw energy from the ground, and since it's flipped over, it can't draw energy from Earth. Just then, Abel notices a large magic stone attached to its bottom, making him happy, though he wishes he could collect from the rest as well. Unfortunately, that won't be possible now. On their way, the duo notices a giant hippo sleeping, and Rio wonders if Abel wants to slay it. But Abel has no such ambitions. He reveals he's never seen it in person, but it appears to be a behemoth. Suddenly, they notice several wyverns approaching, exciting Rio. They'll witness a monster battle from the front row. Abel thinks the behemoth is at a disadvantage, but Rio believes it won't fall so easily. As the wyverns begin attacking, the behemoth rises and lets out a loud screech that knocks them unconscious, making the wyverns fall to the ground. Rio explains it used magic negation. That night, as they set up a fire to cook their meal, Rio jokes that he hoped for a match between Abel and the behemoth. But Abel says that's not happening. He mentions he's heard of traps and dungeons with similar effects, but he's never actually witnessed magic negation before. Hearing the word dungeon excites Rio, and Abel wonders if Rio wants to learn more about them. Rio says he'd like to visit a dungeon himself. Abel tells him there's only 1 dungeon in the central provinces, and fortunately, it happens to be in the town they're heading to. Rio jokingly asks why Abel has been concealing this information from him, prompting Abel to get defensive, saying he didn't know Rio was so interested in dungeons. Rio continues teasing him, asking if he's kept any other important information from him. Abel asks if he knows about elves and dwarves. Rio says he doesn't, so Abel informs him that dwarves are skilled smiths and good fighters, and Lon has a few of them. He further explains that Lon only has 1 elf, while the rest are settled in woods they never leave. Rio thinks it's just as he pictured, but Abel doesn't believe him since he's never been outside that island. The next day, Rio continues leading and reveals that across the mountain they'll find a human settlement. Abel wonders how he obtained this information. Rio recalls how the dragon told him everything. He tells Abel it's better if he doesn't know and calls his source of knowledge beyond humankind. As they walk, they suddenly sense something approaching from behind. A giant griffin appears, leaving Abel in shock, frozen in fear. But Rio quickly takes meat from his sack and throws it into the air. The griffin grabs it and flies away. They're both relieved to have survived. Abel notes he was completely stunned, while Rio admits they might not have made it if they had tried fighting it. Abel thinks they aren't built to fight such monsters and notes there aren't many reports of anyone encountering behemoths or griffins for centuries. He thinks something is wrong with this place. Rio finds it somewhat rude and thinks maybe humans aren't looking hard enough. Abel thinks perhaps these frozen mountains have been keeping them out of human territory. As they're walking, Rio suddenly remembers that the wyverns that attacked the behemoth came from the direction they're now traveling. Soon they spot some wyverns feeding on their prey, and Abel notes they can't fight them. It usually takes around 20 experienced adventurers to take down just one, and even then there are often casualties. Rio thinks that even if they try avoiding them, they'll likely encounter more along the way and won't be able to avoid fighting forever. Rio wonders if it would be easier to fight the wyverns while they're on the ground, and Abel agrees, thinking he can use his sword more effectively that way. So Rio steps forward to engage them. He summons several ice spikes to stab the wyverns, and Abel follows up with his total impalement technique. However, the wyvern screams attract more of their kind. Rio uses an ice attack from above to bring them down, and Abel quickly finishes them off. After the battle, they collect the magic stones. Abel admits he can't believe how easy it was. while Rio wonders if Abel was hoping for a life and death battle just to get his heart racing. Just then, another flock of wyverns approaches. They both prepare to fight, knowing they have no choice but to defeat them to keep moving. After successfully taking them all down, they reach the mountain top and are overjoyed to see a human settlement on the other side. After defeating so many wyverns, Rio feels confident and believes he wouldn't mind encountering more of them. But Abel finds this ridiculous because he thinks it would be best if they never ran into those dangerous creatures again. Abel admits it was surprising how they managed to collect so many magic stones from the wyverns, but he suddenly stops talking as he realizes they've traveled quite far north, though Abel is completely clueless about where exactly they've ended up. Rio nervously hopes they haven't accidentally entered the Debai Empire, but Abel quickly reassures that this isn't the case since the Empire is farther north. Rio is relieved, making Abel curious about why he seems to hate that place so much. Rio tells him he has nothing personal against the Empire, but simply dislikes the name, which Abel finds rather odd. Just then, Rio notices a road cutting through the landscape, and Abel observes it's running east to west. He looks around carefully and recognizes the area. Rio finds him lost in thought and asks if everything is all right. Abel explains that if they follow the road west, they will soon reach the town of Kaladi. This news excites Rio because he really looks forward to sleeping in a proper bed. But Abel thought Rio wanted to fight even more wyverns. Rio quickly explains those are two completely different things. Abel mentions that the food in the town of Kaladi is delicious and insists Rio should definitely try it. This makes Rio even more excited to visit this new town. A while later, they arrive in Kayat and head to a nearby tavern. While sitting there, Abel suggests that Rio should register with the Adventurers Guild, but Rio has no idea what that means. Abel explains that guild registration will serve as his identification, allowing him to enter different towns and countries without paying entry fees. Abel says that when they arrived in the city, he acted as Rio's guarantor and paid a silver coin as the entry fee. But Rio jokingly asks if it was part of a sneaky plan to make him a servant. Abel keeps trying to convince Rio to join the guild, explaining they can sell magic stones and monster materials there for good prices. Otherwise, Rio would have to become an alchemist to use those things, which would be a huge hassle. Rio is surprised they have alchemy in this world, but he's shocked even further when the waiter brings his plate of curry rice to their table. He thinks to himself that in most Isekai stories, the protagonist has to travel extensively to find curry, but somehow it already exists in this world. Apparently, this world had its culinary priorities sorted out from the start. No months of surviving on questionable bread and mystery stew for our protagonist. Abel asks Rio what he's mumbling about, so Rio says it's nothing and takes the first bite. But it's so tasty he can't stop himself from devouring it in seconds. Rio orders another plate and asks Abel if they have curry like this in Lon. Abel confirms they do. He's glad Rio enjoyed it and admits it was quite tasty even the next day. As they leave the town, Rio continues praising the curry they had the previous night and asks Abel to reveal the best desserts in town. Abel is caught off guard and doesn't know how to answer, so he just says he'll think about it. They continue their journey, and after spending a few days walking, they finally see the town of Lon from a distance. As they reach the city gates, the guard recognizes Abel and says everyone was worried since he'd been missing for months. Abel explains he managed to safely return thanks to Rio. The guard excitedly shakes Rio's hand, grateful that he saved his friend. Abel then pays the entry fee, once again acting as his guarantor. The guard then asks if they'll be heading straight to the guild and mentions that Abel's friends are currently out of town, but once they return, they'll be shocked to see him. Once inside the city, Abel suggests they head straight to the guild to register Rio as an adventurer, since Abel can help him rank up. Rio is curious and asks what that means. Abel explains that new adventurers usually start at rank F, but with endorsement from a B rank or higher, they can start at rank E or even D. Rio quickly realizes this means Abel must be above B rank, making him feel proud, while Abel gets shy and quickly changes the subject. Abel goes on to explain that higher ranks allow access to better quests, which also means better rewards. He recommends ranking up, though he adds that Rio probably won't need to worry about money anyway, since they'll earn a lot by selling the wyvern magic stones. Rio wonders if the magic stones are really that valuable, and Abel explains they're actually quite rare. Selling them all at once could even crash the market, but he trusts the guild will know how to handle it. They finally arrive at the guild where the receptionist Nena is shocked to see Abel still alive. Soon all the adventurers gather around him and Rio realizes that Abel is actually quite popular. Rio thinks he should give them some space and steps outside the guild to enjoy the fresh air. Just then, an elf girl walks past him and notices Rio wearing the Fairy King's outfit. She mentions he must have impressed the Fairy King quite a lot. Rio is unable to answer properly, so she says she's in a hurry and perhaps they'll meet again sometime and walks off. A short while later, Abel takes Rio back inside the guild, where he tells everyone that he survived only because of Rio, who will soon be registering as an adventurer. Abel hopes they'll all look after him. Rio is happy to be the center of attention as the others praise him for saving Abel. Moving on, we see Rio's registration process and Abel says he wishes to recommend him for D rank. But Nena is shocked since this is the first time anyone from his party is recommending an adventurer. Abel says Rio is very talented, but Nena tells him she has no problem with it, though according to the rules, they must present some kind of physical proof of strength. Abel says he was hoping to speak to the guild master about it, so Nena goes to inform the guild master about their request while they wait in the meeting room. When Nena shares the good news, the guild master rushes over, eager to see Abel with his own eyes. He had been very worried about him. He then notices Rio and introduces himself as Humaglass, the guild master of Lawn. He thanks Rio, making him feel a bit awkward, and Rio simply says he was just in the right place at the right time. Abel tells Hugh that he wants to endorse Rio for a rank up. Hugh asks about the required proof. Abel confidently assures him that Rio is actually stronger than he is. Abel shows him the magic stones and Hugh realizes that their green color means they belong to wind elementals, based on their size and vivid glow. He suspects they might be from wyverns, which Abel confirms. Hugh is shocked, finding it hard to believe they managed to collect so many since fighting that many wyverns would normally require an entire army. He worries that if such monsters were to attack the city, it could be completely destroyed. But Abel reassures him there's no need for concern as they encountered the creatures far to the south of the Malefic Mountains. Rio is surprised to hear the name, so Abel tells him that earlier after they found the road to Kayat, he realized where they were. Hugh reveals that it is said no one has made it through those mountains alive, and even experienced adventurers don't go there unless they have a very compelling reason. Hugh can't believe they defeated all those wyverns by themselves. But now that he has seen the physical proof of Rio's abilities, he has no objections to the rank-up request. Suddenly, Abel's party, the Crimson Sword, arrives at the guild. Abel goes to catch up with his old friends while Rio heads off to finish the rest of the registration process. As Rio enters the guild master's office, he starts to wonder if he truly deserves the D rank. Hugh explains that while Abel is very gifted, even he can't take down a wyvern alone. So if Rio helped defeat several, he must be exceptionally talented. As Hugh pats Rio on the back to congratulate him, he's surprised by how strong Rio's body feels for a mage. Just then, Nena arrives with the paperwork and properly introduces herself before starting Rio's registration. She begins the short interview by asking his name and confirming that he's a mage. Then she asks about his magic element, and he tells her it's water. When she asks where he lives, Rio explains that he just arrived in the city. Nena lets him know that for the first 300 days after joining the guild, he's allowed to stay in the guild's lodgings. Nena asks if he's ever been in a dungeon before, and he admits he hasn't. So she tells him about a monthly introductory dungeon engineering course, which offers a full guide for new adventurers and tips on what to watch out for. When Nena asks if he's interested, Rio excitedly says yes. She lets him know the next course starts in 2 days and says she'll sign him up. Nena tells him to be at the meeting room on the 3rd floor at 9 o'clock that day. When Rio looks surprised, Nena adds that there's a clock in town to help him keep track of time. With that, Nena wraps up the paperwork. But Rio gets confused when she says it's time to start the actual registration. She asks Rio to place his hand on a crystal, and the device instantly creates his guild card, which she then hands to him. Nena congratulates him on officially becoming a registered adventurer. As they leave, Hugh feels relaxed because he was really worried about Abel since things looked quite grim in his absence. He thinks he would never want to experience that again, which makes him thank Rio even more because he saved them all. He remembers he hasn't informed someone about Abel's return, so he immediately grabs his communication device to make a call. Meanwhile, Abel takes Rio on a walk. When Rio asks where they're going, Abel tells him they're off to get his rewards for helping him get back to town. Abel mentions he wants to buy Rio some new clothes and a staff. Rio thanks him but admits he doesn't understand why Abel keeps mentioning a staff. Abel explains it's because he is a magician, but Rio tells him he can cast magic without one and can also use his sword in close combat. Abel is shocked to hear that and asks about the sword, so Rio shows it to him. However, Abel thinks it looks more like a knife than a proper sword. He worries he might have hurt Rio's feelings, but Rio doesn't mind at all. Rio starts explaining how size doesn't matter. Instead, Rio asks for Abel's help since there are still many things he doesn't know about this world. Rio soon learns that a day here is 24 hours, a week has 7 days, and a month has 30 days, basically the same as on Earth. He's surprised to learn that clothing is also measured in centimeters. It feels like too much of a coincidence, and Rio starts to wonder if there might be some kind of connection. Maybe someone else was teleported to this world before him. That would explain why so many things are the same as his home planet. Abel then invites him to his party where Rio is the guest of honor, and he introduces Rio to everyone as his savior. The next morning, Nena walks with him and asks if he had fun last night. Rio says he did, but admits he's just a little exhausted. They soon arrive at the guild dorms, and as they enter the room, they see a guy doing push-ups. When he notices Nena, he gets flustered. She tells them that Rio will be their new roommate, and the two introduce themselves as Niels and Ido. After reminding Rio about his class, Nena leaves. Niels comments on how beautiful she is while Ido says they should stop being so formal with each other. Just then, Nena returns with another newcomer who will also be joining them as a roommate. Ido thinks the new guy looks pretty young, and Amon confirms he's just 16. Sadly, after losing his parents, becoming an adventurer was his only option to make a living. Nena tells Rio that Amon will also be taking the basic dungeon course with him, so they should go together, which they both agree to. Meanwhile, Abel's friend Lynn can't believe that a mage could create a thick ice shield. She thinks they're usually too thin and can be shattered by something as simple as an air slash. She also insists that using it midair to attack an enemy is completely impossible, but Abel tells her that Rio did exactly that. Lynn explains that magic can typically only be conjured close to the caster, so none of it makes sense to her. Still, the priestess says that if Abel is saying all this, then it must be true. However, Lynn fears that if Rio were to ever turn against them, it would be a big issue, or if he joins the kingdom as an enemy. Abel assures them that it won't ever happen. When they ask how he can be so sure, he explains it's because Rio hates the kingdom's name. Abel's reasoning is pretty solid. Anyone who gets that worked up over how a country's name sounds is probably too busy nitpicking pronunciation to plan any actual evil schemes. 5 days of dull introductory lectures later, Ryu and Amon were finally about to get their first ever dungeon experience. Their instructor told them that for their first time, they would be taken to the first layer of the dungeon. While Ryu was quite excited, Amon wasn't exactly too hyped up about the idea of intentionally barging into a monster fiesta. The teacher asked the class, which had fewer people than there were in the audience at a WNBA game, if anyone had any questions regarding what they had covered so far. Ryu raised his hand and asked his teacher if it was possible to instantly travel to a layer you'd already cleared. It was possible, however, only in dungeons found in the southern provinces, not here in Lune. The time to visit the actual thing after 5 days of boring lectures was finally here. The dungeon in Lune lay at the city's center, which was so because the city had actually been built around it. The teacher explained the great tidal bore, when the numbers of the monsters in the dungeon suddenly increased a lot. This happened once every few years, and more often than not the monsters would come out and say hello to the locals. To keep the monsters from greeting the residents, a double wall had been erected around the dungeon. The town's outer wall was there to defend against outside attacks, while the inner one protected from internal attacks from the monsters, said Ryu, stating the obvious. The great tidal bore had instilled a deep fear inside Amon's mind, similar to when an Italian sees a pineapple pizza for the first time. His teacher told him to relax since the great tidal bore wasn't going to happen anytime soon. Ryu also pitched in by reminding Amon not to forget to breathe while he imagined what kind of terrors lurked down there. Their teacher repeated it one more time, for the wimps, that there was no need to worry about monsters right now, and they were free to explore as they pleased. As though he had jinxed himself, a soldier ant, which was not normally supposed to show up at the first layer, appeared. Ryu had read about it already and didn't find it to be a threat. A soldier ant's weakness was the base of its neck, and so Ryu came up with a plan where he would use ice magic to pin down the ant in place while Amon would use his sword to take it out. Ryu cast ice sickle lances that pierced through several parts of the ant, pinning it to the ground, and told Amon to finish it off. Though nervous and reluctant, Amon did his job, And with that, these two secured their first dungeon victory. Even if Ryu did 99% of the work, Ryu then took out the magic stone inside the ant's head to keep it as a memento for both of them of their first dungeon triumph. They celebrated with drinks back at the lodge. Nils was upset they couldn't celebrate with alcohol, as it was banned in the lodges, but the truth was he was just looking for an excuse to get hammered. Ito was very impressed with the way Ryu and Amon handled themselves in their first ever dungeon, even slaying a soldier ant. Amon told them it was all thanks to Ryu, which was true, but Ryu told everyone that Amon played an important role too, the important role being cutting an immobile object with a knife, probably no harder than cutting a cake. Ryu was planning on going back the next day, and even traveling as far as the third layer. He invited Amon, and he readily accepted as if he hadn't soiled his pants multiple times today at the dungeon. Though they didn't face any issues, a soldier ant, something that should be in the second or third level, did show up. Apparently this type of abnormality had been happening for the last couple of months. As Ryu pondered this, someone came and stood right behind him. As he was aura farming behind Ryu, he told them this had to do with the ant's ability to dig around the dungeon, leading them to the first layer too. It was Abel. He introduced himself to Ryu's roommates as if he were Ryu's older brother and asked them not to mind if Ryu seemed like he had a few screws loose at times or all the time because he didn't mean it and was socially as inept as a gym bro who couldn't talk about anything other than the gym, even if his life depended on it. After a few business days, it finally registered in Nils's head, who was standing in front of him. Abel and the Crimson Sword were evidently very well known around here, and Nils rushed for a handshake with Abel as if he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. Abel had come to the guild to report to the guild master, as his party was just coming off a quest that had taken them a little longer than they would have liked. So he had to go and show his face to Guildmaster McGrath before he ended up plastering missing posters of him all over town. The rest of the Crimson Sword also arrived and ruined all the aura points Abel had gathered thus far when Warren threw him over his shoulder like a bag of potatoes to carry him to the guild master. Lynn, the mage in the Crimson Sword who blew her fuse on Ryu's absurd magic the other day, was now staring deep into his soul. Lihia quickly called her away before Ryu decided to file a restraining order against her. Abel begged Ryu to save him from this aura purge, but Ryu sided with the enemy and told them to bend him to their will as much as they liked. As they were heading to McGrath's office, Lynn explained that she wasn't trying to be a creep earlier with Ryu. She just wanted to see the great magician for herself. There were certainly better methods to do that. Abel told them to be patient. In time they would see for themselves why he was hyping this kid up so much. The next day, Ryu and Amon headed over to the dungeon again. This time their enemy wasn't a six-legged arthropod, but a four-legged canid, a couple of demon wolves. Amon took the front while Ryu supported him from the side. While slashing one wolf, Amon got attacked by another and didn't have enough time to react. But Ryu took care of it using his icicle lance. A tougher battle than before, but all's well that ends well. The real battle was starting now, which was for Amon to gather his breath back again. Ryu noticed that Amon's swordplay bore an uncanny resemblance to Abel's. Abel's teacher, a man named Kiro, was an adventurer from his hometown who had learned swordplay from a major school in the royal capital, Hume, which was where Amon had adopted his style from as well. Ryu saw the talent Amon possessed and knew he would make one heck of a swordsman sooner or later. Despite being a quote-unquote magician, Amon had noticed that Ryu was pretty familiar with a sword himself. Ryu told him it was thanks to his mentor, whom he had trained with many times, but he wasn't well versed, or so he thought, at least, because his style was original, said the man who had gotten private swordplay lessons from the Fairy King, the Dullahan himself. Ryu checked if Amon had regained his breath by now, or if he was still gasping like he had taken the stairs instead of the elevator. His style of sword had a downside. It used quite a bit of energy. Abel knew that and started feeling bad about it. But Ryu didn't mean it was a bad thing. He just needed to build his stamina up. Ryu suggested Amon start putting even 10% of the energy he expended on overthinking into working out and jogging. He then gave an example of Abel, who had the routine of practicing his swing every day without fail. Abel was a borderline genius with the sword, but that wasn't just because of talent. No matter what he was doing and where he was, he wouldn't stop putting in the effort. Abel, being the David Goggins of Phi, successfully encouraged Amon to start working harder. On the next day, Ryu decided to take a day off from venturing into the dungeon. Instead, he headed to the Library of Lune, a large institute with more books in it than Hermione's bookshelf. Ryu couldn't decide what to read first, the guide, which would make his life on this planet a lot easier, or recipes for tasty snacks. While Ryu was pondering if he should have read the guide a little instead of staring at curry recipes for an hour, an eclipse occurred all of a sudden. Ryu got a very uneasy feeling in his body from everything suddenly, as though the whole world were changing. That's when a foe showed up. And Akuma, the creature Ryu's monster compendium had advised never to face, had shown itself. The Akuma wasn't too fond of seeing a human exist, so she took a giant fireball and shot it as an attack called Hellfire right at Ryu. He blocked it with several layers of ice, but could feel the intensity of her power. She might perhaps be as strong, or perhaps even stronger than Bihi, the giant hippo from the Malefic Mountains, or the Griffon they bribed with meat. She was definitely worse. Every instinct in Ryu's body was yelling at him to run away immediately. But could he even do that? Ryu put up a brave resistance, but the Akuma decided she had had enough of this and tried to end it all by shooting a wind lance right at Ryu's heart. But instead of puncturing his chest, it only pushed him back, leaving the Akuma confused. Then she recognized the robes he was wearing were given to him by the Fairy King. With her magic not working, she switched to good old-fashioned stabby. Ryu pulled out his ice sword given to him by the Fairy King, and the two of them started clashing blades. The Akuma almost got Ryu at one point, but he chased her off with ice bullets. The Akuma's speed was incredible, making Ryu wonder if she was using wind magic for her mobility. Through their clashes, Ryu realized that their speeds were comparable, and the strength this Akuma was able to generate was nothing compared to the Fairy King. The Akuma tried making another fireball, but Ryu extinguished it before it was even ready, displaying conjuring skills on a different level. The Akuma was alerted by Ryu's talent and felt she needed to send him to the grave right now or regret it later. As they were dueling, Ryu started raining ice bullets on her, but the Akuma erected stone walls around herself to block them. Ryu wasn't going to make it that easy and attacked from every direction, leaving her no chance of blocking. This gave him an opening, and he leaped to make a decisive blow. The Akuma also charged, and their swords rattled in an intense clash. The Akuma's wounds had already started to heal. This caught Ryu off guard, and he got sent crashing into the building behind as a result of it. But not before surrounding the Akuma with bubbles of boiling hot water that burned your skin on contact. The Akuma screamed in agony and quickly engulfed herself in sediment. She then burst into fire, with the deranged look on her face that you make when you find out about Bakano. Never got a new season, but the vending machine anime did. The fight was about to reach its climax now, with both parties tapping into their max power. But then the eclipse started fading. The Akuma's sword started fading away too, and she told Ryu this fight would have to be rescheduled. The Akuma was having the time of her life while Ryu was running late for dinner. She wanted to continue fighting, but as this particular cloister was a special case and out of her control, she couldn't do anything about it. Ryu questioned her about what exactly a cloister was, and could it be served with curry? The Akuma, probably gatekeeping, avoided Ryu's question and instead started telling her name, remembering which would be a more difficult task than memorizing the French dictionary. Her name was Leonore Araka Albuquerque. Ryu was just Ryu. He called Leonore an Akuma to her face. The fact that Ryu knew what she was wasn't very ideal for Leonore, and all the more reason for her to kill him right now. But she didn't have time for that, and Ryu wasn't exactly a fledgling that could be taken out with ease. Leonore told Ryu that he would meet her or someone like her, implying the existence of more Akumas someday. Until then, she told Ryu to brush twice a day, take his vitamins, and not die because his life now belonged to her. Definitely not a creepy thing to say. And with that, Leonore vanished without a trace, as if she had never even been here. Ryu could finally take a sigh of relief. His mind was still spinning, and his shoulder hurt like hell. But he was fortunate it only hurt and wasn't a 3-inch gaping wound thanks to the defensive properties of the Fairy King's robes. Ryu decided to calm his nerves by going shopping. He needed to get some cash first, so he headed back to the dorm. As he was leaving, Ryu spotted a bunch of guys circled around Amon, Nils, and Ito. These were guys from Dorm 1, led by Dan, the biggest troublemaker in the dormitory. Dan had ambushed them and was lecturing them about not letting your guard down at any time when Ryu decided to back his statement by taking out all his lackeys. Dan tried to hit Ryu, but a simple hilt to the gut from Ryu was enough to take him down. Ryu pulled out a healing potion for them and suggested they head for the hot baths. He had Ito, who was a priest, heal his shoulder injury. Although the injury itself wasn't bad, it could have been bone-shattering and potentially fatal, which was probably Legionaire's goal. Ryu's heart would have been hit if he hadn't dodged at the last second. The guys tried to get the tea about this incident, but Ryu was too tired to explain everything right now. Legionnaire almost kicking his butt, and then him bullying F ranks were the highlights of his day. Not an ideal start at all, but right now all he wanted to do was to relax and recover.